Mike and Virginia Chevalier are not only diehard Broncos fans, but they supported DNVR for a long time as members, and they're a husband and wife team with over 15 years of financial services experience. Visit them over at DNVRmortgage.com and enter to win a free DNVR shirt or hat of your choice when you do. And you can get set up with a free consultation to discuss all of your options. Since your home is likely to be one of your largest assets and your mortgage likely your largest debt, they believe it's vital to consider your full financial picture when purchasing a home. This includes considering your short-term and long-term planning goals, your investments, and your tax situation. Mike and Virginia will work tirelessly to find the best loan for your situation. So again, visit them at dnvrmortgage.com or call them at 303-257-6578. That's Michael Chevalier, NMLS number 1931006, and Virginia Chevalier, NMLS number 1910631. Let's jump into the show.
To Zach, Mase Zach, and the bar. 3 for Mr. B in that old trophy case. Number 4 we're still waiting for. Well, bring on the chase. Out on the field in Mile High, Broncos win is our desire. Couple with a break, brew and a friend, bleed orange and blue to the bitter end. Come and join us at the DNVR.
Welcome in to the DNVR Broncos podcast presented by MSU Denver Online. Head over to msudenver.edu/online to scope out all they have to offer. 750 total classes, over 40 hybrid programs, everything you could really need from an online education. MSU Denver does it all. So check them out. They have rigorous and affordable education and professors that bring the real world into the classroom. msudenver.edu/online is where you need to go to check them out today.
My boys, what's up, fellas? Happy Wednesday. So pumped to be joined by you guys and all of our friends, including the Count and Dustin Canfield chiming in here. What's up, guys?
What's up? Man, well, what's up is the NFL has a big problem on their hands. And I said this to you guys right before we went live. I don't know whether to be surprised or unsurprised that the NFL did not have a concrete plan for how to handle what to do when a team has someone who tests positive for COVID-19. And you're seeing now that the NFL just simply didn't. They did not have a concrete plan for this. And it's coming back to bite them because it feels like everyone in the world knows that there is an incubation period with this virus, and it's not as simple as if someone else tests positive and you test negative on the same day, that means that they have it and you don't. And as we're now seeing with Stephon Gilmore, who is the news of the day here, he most likely got this from Cam Newton. Especially considering he was on the plane with the Patriots members who were in close contact with Cam Newton. And it took a while for them to find out that he tested positive. And while likely carrying the virus, was able to play in a game against the Kansas City Chiefs. And so now the Chiefs are on high alert. And it's just like this whole thing, in my eyes, feels like it's starting to unravel a little bit. And it's really because they didn't have a good plan.
They didn't have a good plan. Unfortunately, they weren't able to, for logistic reasons and whatever, go into any kind of bubble. Because what we've seen now is that the bubbles with the NHL and the NBA and MLS back in July, they work and they held. But you go to Major League Baseball, and we saw within 2 weeks of the start of the season, the outbreak with the Marlins, an outbreak with the Cardinals. And the NFL, they're a reactive league. They usually like to see others kind of do something first and then figure out the best practices and then go forward. They had a chance to see things that worked, things that didn't, make the corrections. And if they thought that something like what happened in Major League Baseball wasn't going to come to their shores, then that's supreme intellectual arrogance right there. I mean, shoot, they had more numbers, more people going home at night than they do in Major League Baseball. The odds were not in their favor. And the fear now is, we saw with the Titans and we could see with the Patriots, that drip of a positive or two coming up every couple of days. I mean, after what we saw with the Titans, guys, I don't know how they play this game Sunday.
Well, and now the Titans, of course, even more positive tests after a couple of days of negative tests. I thought it was extremely short-sighted to play the Patriots in Chiefs game just 48 hours after Cam Newton tested positive. And we know there's a lot of things we don't know about this virus, but we know that there's an incubation period. It can take, up to 7 to 10 days or something. And so to turn around, and now, of course, you have the picture of Stephon Gilmore pretty much hugging Patrick Mahomes after that game. So now, like you said, the Chiefs are on high alert. There's going to be a potential bigger fallout, not just with the Patriots, but with other teams. Guys, it's mind-blowing. How does the NFL, with all of the resources they have, literally any resource they want, they can get, how are we making these decisions? Because I feel like, if there's a positive test from a guy that's been central to your team 48 hours before or 24 hours before a game, how were they just then pushing it 24 hours back? I want this season to go on. And that I don't know if that needs a break, a 2-week break to get everything on it. If, the teams that have one case just don't play for a week, whatever it is, I want this season to happen. And with the NFL has to take a step back and say, okay, let's not focus on, playing 1 week 4 game or 1 week 5 game. Let's make sure the season happens.
Yeah. And that, I mean, it's crazy to think, but again, this is only the fault of the NFL for not having a better plan. And so while they're probably running around panicking today because they know what the fallout's going to look like if Patrick Mahomes tests positive for COVID-19 because they allowed a game to happen in which a player who was carrying the virus played against him, hugged him after the game. I mean, that's not Patrick Mahomes' fault. That's the NFL's fault. And that is a really, really, really bad look for them if players, and especially high-profile players, start testing positive because of their negligence. So they know, that, for the first time, I think, they're probably panicking about what's going on right now with this virus. And part of me thinks, okay, they're going to have to do something drastic. And another part of me thinks they're just going to say, we press on. Keep going. We're sticking with this. And that's worrisome for Broncos fans because the Broncos play the Patriots this week. And like you said with the Titans, tests continue to trickle out. Well, there's no guarantee that this isn't going to happen. And yet we still haven't found, I believe they said that all Chiefs players tested negative today. So that's a good start. But as we're starting to realize, negative tests in a vacuum really aren't that important. You have to wait and wait and wait. And just from a non-doctor, just a person who's been observing this from the side, it does feel like out of nowhere, the period of time that requires caution after a positive test, and it's not just in sports, has just been cut in half or less out of just nowhere. Everyone had the number 14 days in their head, right? And so you thought, okay, if a player tests positive, they're down for 14 days. They're gonna miss 2 weeks probably, and the whole team has to be set aside. That, at least that's the way I thought it was going to be, or at least a week. But they just waited a couple days with the Patriots, and now they're starting to see the side effects of that. And it's just weird. No one talked. I don't, unless I missed some big announcement that was it's actually only 5 days that you have to be worried about. That's not what I was under the impression of. So it's just weird that the NFL was kind of willy-nilly about this, and now they really are. And everyone who listens to this podcast knows that I'm the ultimate optimist when it comes to this sort of thing. And I truly believe the NFL now is in deep with what they've caused to happen. And that's, again, I'll keep going back to that. That's the most important part. They caused this. This is their fault.
I mean, what if we look at that Monday night game? If we start seeing the Chiefs have some positive tests here in the next several days, I mean, what if we're looking at a Monday night football game being a super spreader event? And that's what's keeping everybody up at night right now. I want to ask you guys this. Put yourselves in the shoes of Broncos players. Let's say you're a Broncos player and you see the positive tests already coming down in New England. Would you want to play Sunday?
No, because I mean, with all of the uncertainty out there, and that's a very good question and a fair question, because it's not like there's multiple weeks before that game. No, it's just in a couple of days, and it's not just Cam who's tested positive, in my opinion. It's not just Stephon Gilmore who's tested positive. It's not just a practice squad player that's tested positive. Stephon Gilmore was on that plane with the Patriots and, just around them for so long. It's hard for me to think that these are going to be the only positive tests coming from the Patriots in the next week. So that's scary, is just all of the unknown. And by the time the Broncos play the Patriots, it doesn't seem like we're going to know everything by then.
And what's crazy here is that the Titans are being investigated right now, and there's a lot of rumors going around about what caused this and their negligence and et cetera, because they in the end they were the nucleus of really all of this talk, and it's actually being thrown around that if it is proven that they were negligent, they could have to forfeit games, because again, the NFL is going to have a hard time rescheduling 2 games at the end of the season. It's a lot easier for them to say, you guys screwed this up, you're taking L's. And the question is, if a similar thing starts happening with the Patriots, could a similar thing be doled out on them? And then, of course, you're getting to the Broncos game, which certainly feels like it's in jeopardy at the very least at this point. And especially, Mase, what you mentioned, if you're a player, and we do have to mention that there has not been a positive coming out of the Chiefs side of this yet. But if there is, as a Broncos player, you don't feel like the NFL is protecting you because they just did the same thing on the other side. So how are you going to trust them if they say, like, nope, you're good to go? But that's another thing that comes into play here, though, is if the NFL ends up investigating the Patriots because they have an outbreak on their side, and it is proven that Cam was doing something unapproved, then could they forfeit games, including the game against the Broncos this weekend?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the NFL sent out a memo updating their COVID-19 protocols and procedures and making them even more strict for teams moving forward. And in there, they said, we want to keep these measures in here so that we don't have to change the schedule, so that we don't have to have unfair advantages and competitive mismatches here. And they may just have to do that because, guys, what happens if the Broncos or any team has 3 games that are postponed? Well, there's only 1 bye week, so you can only put 1 game there if you can even work that out. There's been talks of maybe adding a week 18 game. Well, that's only 1 week that you can do. And just in the past 2 weeks, we've seen, stuff moving already. And if this does spread to the Chiefs or does spread to another team because of these teams right now, then we're going to have so many games up in the air. And then maybe teams are having to forfeit, like you said, Ryan. Maybe teams are only playing 14 games in order to play the Super Bowl on time. And then that's what the NFL wants to avoid. But the NFL didn't say that we will make sure that there's no competitive mismatch. They said we want to try to prevent that. So the NFL knows that it may have to come down to one team playing 12 games and another team playing 16.
Yeah, and I mean, you want to talk about competitive disadvantages. The Chiefs now have to play 3 games in 10 days, and I believe the 3rd game of that stretch is against the Titans. Now, if the Titans don't play this week, I think it's the Titans or it's someone else who had a game canceled already. They could be coming off of 11 plus days rest, where the Chiefs will be coming 3 games in that period. That is a massive competitive disadvantage. And I think this is something that teams probably had to be at peace with just coming into it, that competitive advantages might occur. But it's certainly not ideal. Oh, no, it's the Bills, right? It's the Bills in that third game. And the Bills are supposed to play the Titans this week. Is that what it is?
Yes.
Okay. So if they don't play that game, then they would be coming off a large chunk of rest while the Chiefs would be playing their third game in that many days. And that game possibly, well, at least in that scenario, would likely be for first place in the entire AFC. So there's a lot at play here.
Imagine a scenario where, let's say, that game doesn't get played at all. Well, imagine a scenario where you get to the end of the season and say the Chiefs manage to play all their games and go 15-1, but the Bills, they have 2 games wiped out they can't make up, and they go 13-1, and Buffalo, and then Buffalo is sitting there, and they're the number 2 seed based solely, or let's say the Chiefs are 14-1, and Buffalo is the number 2 seed based on win percentage because they didn't play as many games, even though they had the same amount of losses. I mean, that's the sort of thing that we're steaming toward here. And the difference between the 1 and 2, of course, this year, it's massive because you only have one team getting the bye in each conference in the postseason now. There's a lot of implications to this. I mean, we could sit here for 3 hours and not get through all the potential ramifications of what happens if this, if that, if there are some teams playing 14 games and some playing 15 and some playing 16. I mean, this is something that I really hope the league thought about before they went into this.
Yeah, and we were assuming, at least I was assuming, way back when, there was the infamous quote of "we don't have any contingency plans." Essentially the old John Elway, we're going Plan A. And I was assuming way back then that, like, obviously they have contingency plans. They just don't want to. They don't want to sow doubt in the minds of football fans that the season, could be in jeopardy. Well, now it's like, wait, did they have no contingency plans? Because their plan for what's going on thus far, it doesn't seem like a plan at all. It really feels like they're flying by the seat of their pants.
I hope they at least thought of the mini bubble or the 32 team bubbles, where basically each team goes hotel, facility, bus, stadium, or bus, plane, stadium. I hope that they've at least laid the groundwork for that at minimum. If you can't get everybody into four bubbles of, say, 8 teams, that they've at least considered the possibilities of each team going into a bubble, even though nobody wants that, no player wants that. Shoot, you might have some guys that if they say, okay, we're going into these 32 bubbles, you might have some guys that choose to opt out. You might have to actually create an opt-out window for some players who simply don't want to be away from their families for that long. So you sort of start that process over again.
Yeah, I think you'd have to do that. And in that memo from the NFL last night, they emphasized that if a game is not played, players are not paid. So that would be the incentive for players, of course, to want to go into the bubble and try to get those guys that are making the big paychecks into that bubble. Is just by saying, yeah, you can opt out. We'll give you $150,000 stipend if you want to opt out now, maybe prorate at $120,000. But, you're passing up on $17 million if you're a guy like Von Miller or someone of his stature, if you aren't going to play in this bubble. So that would be the reason why the NFL would be able to do that. Yes, it would be a 3-month, 4-month bubble if you make the playoffs. But otherwise, you're not getting paid.
I take issue, though, with that statement from the NFL. If games are not played, the players won't be paid. Because what if the Chiefs have an outbreak now? Whose fault is that?
Right.
That's the NFL's fault. That is not the Chiefs' fault. There is the Jordan, I don't know how to pronounce his last name.
Tamu
test that I guess the NFL could maybe spin that against them. But in my opinion, if the Chiefs, and I'll touch wood for them, had an outbreak, that's the NFL's fault, not the Chiefs' fault. And so then those players are going to miss out on their paychecks because the NFL decided to force through a game after their opponent had a positive test, and likely, and as admitted by the Patriots sending a totally different plane, had 20 or so players who came in close contact with the guy who tested positive, and now one of those guys is positive. Like, I don't know, that seems wrong on the part of the NFL if that would happen to the Chiefs. Now, Patriots, Titans, I can see that, that they failed to uphold their end of the bargain, but I don't know if the Chiefs did anything wrong.
Yeah, that's very, very fair. So, guys, for the Broncos, I mean, what's next if this game is postponed? Let's say postponed to sometime in the future. Is that a net positive for the Broncos? A net negative? Because right now, Drew Lock's up in the air. Didn't practice yesterday. Some reports, I believe, one from Mike Kliss saying that he has been throwing these last few days. But the Patriots would likely also have Cam and Stephon Gilmore back. Is it a wash? What do you guys think?
Well, it depends on when the game is pushed back to. Because if it's like Monday, like they did this time, which we saw how well that worked, it doesn't change really anything. But I guess the main question is here: would you rather have Brett Rippon versus Jarrett Stidham or Brian Hoyer? And no Stephon Gilmore, or would you rather have Drew Lock versus Cam Newton and Stephon Gilmore? I think the answer there is obvious. It's weird to be talking about it in strictly a competitive football sense, but weirdly enough, I think you'd rather take your chances with Brett Rippon going up against whatever backup quarterback they decide to go with than you would going up against the full-strength Patriots.
But it's not just that. I mean, you also have to say, what about having AJ Boye back? So literally, this is your quarterback and cornerback one for both teams being back in the mix. So
yeah, it still seems really easy to me.
Well, I mean, Boye is good. Gilmore is one of the 3 or 4 best corners in the league right now. Drew Lock can be good. Cam Newton was playing out of his mind before he got hurt. Looked like he had the Patriots, right back at their accustomed place, contending for a championship. So would it favor the Broncos? Yes, but I'll say this. I don't want this to become a discussion or even a thought about saying, okay, well, let's play the game now because it benefits the Broncos, even though it may not be medically wise to play the game.
No,
right.
and of course, and I wasn't going to push that at all. They of course should be safe. And it seems like now from the little medical advice that I know, it seems like the smart thing to do would be to push the game, and not just push the game 24 hours. That is just not smart at all. But it is interesting to think about it on the football field with just how dinged up these teams are. I mean, we could easily see 2 or backup third string quarterbacks face each other this week. If the game's postponed, it could be, a potential MVP candidate in Cam Newton if he didn't miss some games, and the future with Drew Lock. It's wild to think how that could have an impact. But of course, you don't think about that when you're deciding what to do with this game. You do what's smart, because the NFL needs to not just do the short play here. They need to take a step back and say, let's have this season happen. Let's have a Super Bowl happen. And if it does stretch to the Chiefs because of them playing the Patriots, and it could stretch to the Broncos, stop.
Yeah. And I think that's the main thing here is the NFL has to come up with a better plan. Or a plan in the first place to try and mitigate, the spread here. Because if you just keep playing these games, suddenly you went from 1 team to 2 teams to 3 teams. All of a sudden it's 6 teams, and now you're not only in jeopardy of shutting things down for a couple weeks. You might have to stop the whole season and just call it a day. So that is obviously a worst case scenario. The NFL, I feel like, has been operating in a best case scenario mindset of, okay, well, here's what's going to happen if just all the teams take care of business, none of the players get it, then we'll just play a season. I feel like they now need to shift their focus to a worst case scenario mindset and decide how can we avoid getting to that point.
Do you think maybe that might involve actually going into a bubble like the NHL and the NBA did, and then putting the season on pause until you figure out the logistics, but knowing that that bubble isn't going to give you a full 16-game season, that it might get you to, say, 10 games or 12 games and then have a playoff?
Oh, man. Now you're starting to have to give money back.
Yeah.
And I know they don't want to do that. So I think, though, if you wanted to go to that bubble system, you would have to at least stop everything for a week and just get everyone situated, get everything figured out there. You can't just be like, okay, everyone go to the hotels by tomorrow.
Yeah.
You know, like you got to give everyone time to prepare and figure out what they're going to do. Man, it seems unlikely to me. To be honest, all contingency plans seem unlikely to me. I really do think the NFL is going to try to keep treating this as a game by game basis. And because on the whole, infection rates are so low in the NFL, I think they're going to be able to use that as kind of a cover and saying, okay, well, we know that we're going to have to postpone this Broncos Patriots game and that Titans Bills game or whatever it may be. But we'll still be able to play every other game this week, and then we'll just get right back to it next week. I think that's a lot more likely than any wide-scale contingency plan from the NFL.
I think so too. And I think that's what the NFL is going to do, at least for this week. See if anything continues to break out. That's just the risky play. And it's the risky play because for the most part, the goal is to keep most teams on a 16-game schedule. And, the NFL, at least for right now, can think that every team can stay on a 16-game schedule. They'll find a way to make the Patriots-Broncos game work if it is postponed later in the season. But you're taking the risk of things just continuing to spread. And then once half the league has it and can't play games, well, then you're playing no games for an entire week. And then, of course, that's the absolute worst case scenario for the league. So I agree with you. I think they're going to take the risky play right now and say that they're isolated cases.
Yeah, there's what they should do, and there's what they will do. I mean,
yeah.
And unfortunately, I don't think that these two things are going to cross over. I think they're just going to keep plowing ahead and cross their fingers and hope it doesn't get any worse. But I mean, you see the numbers in some spots around the country. I'm sure you guys saw yesterday that the Packers announced no fans indefinitely at home games at Lambeau Field because things are spiking in Wisconsin, and unfortunately, you can expect spikes to occur in plenty of states here as we get into the winter months. So, I don't think crossing your fingers and hoping is the best strategy, but it wouldn't surprise me if that's what the NFL is thinking.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, I think the Patriots will probably be pushing for the game to be postponed, would they not? I mean, they would go from having to play a game on short rest without their two best players to having a 2-week bye week. And that, to me, is a much bigger advantage for them than anything else. So obviously there could be things changing there where they might actually end up having to play a game when they're supposed to have their bye week or whatever, if the NFL can move the schedule around. But I just think there's a good chance that, old Bill and Bob are calling up their guy Roger and saying, hey, it seems really unsafe for us to play this week.
Yeah, and then we'll see how good friends Bob and Roger still are. But yeah, because they have a short week right now. And then if you're able to get past at least your first COVID outbreak and only not have your quarterback for one game, and then you'd never miss Stephon Gilmore, that would be a win for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Although Joe Ellis has Roger Goodell's private line as well, so I wonder what he would want here. I'm sure he'll be calling.
Yeah, I'm sure there will be conversations. Last thing, I want to just shift real quick. You guys had the opportunity to talk to some players, talk to some coaches yesterday. What did we learn? What do we need to know? What went down in the press conferences?
Well, that right there, that moment of silence was what we learned from Bill Belichick yesterday when we talked to him. Didn't learn a squat thing from him. It seems like Cam Newton, there's a chance that he can play, although it does seem slim. And from the players that we talked to, the biggest thing that stuck out to me, of course, it was very cool talking to Mike Purcell, who just received the contract extension. But Melvin Gordon really, really, really hinted that the Broncos will be running sets with Phillip Lindsay and Melvin Gordon on the field. And man, that's what we were pounding the table for before the season. And we loved seeing it at the beginning of the season when Phil was healthy. And they need to go back to that, and it seems like they will. So that's good news.
Wait a minute. You didn't learn anything from Bill Belichick telling you about
don't start with
Joe
the
Collier and working with him in 1978 and how much it impacted him as a coach? I mean,
I think it's absolutely hilarious that the Denver media knows that the only thing that Bill Belichick will ever talk about when he talks to us is the 78 Broncos. I've heard Bill Belichick tell the story of the 78 Broncos literally every single time that we've ever talked to him on a conference call. At this point, I could recite it myself.
You know what? The thing is, Bill is always more comfortable talking about the past and the general arc of football history and football trends than anything about his present team.
Oh, without a doubt.
And people and the reporters know that in New England as well. So it's always like, if you want to get him going, it's don't talk about the package you're running with Cam Newton this year. Like, just maybe talk about the evolution of running quarterbacks and how often and how the RPO has transformed the game. And then you'll basically wind him up and he'll go for 2.5, 3 minutes. He'll expound.
Yeah, it's imagine having to do that every day.
Oh my goodness.
Last thing I think that's important to cover on the live portion of the show. Where do you guys feel Drew Lock is at right now, and how likely do you believe it is that he plays on Sunday, if they play on Sunday, or maybe Monday or Tuesday or whenever?
Highly unlikely that he plays. I mean, the fact that he was out there, but he was standing and watching. He was not in a jersey. It's what we've seen the last couple of weeks from Drew Lock. So, yeah, I don't think he plays Sunday. I don't think he plays Monday. If it's on Tuesday, I don't think he plays Tuesday.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that he didn't practice yesterday is pretty telling to me. If he's going to play, why isn't he out there yesterday throwing the ball around with his teammates to then see how he feels on Wednesday, to then see how he feels on Thursday? So he really needs to be out there today in order for me to say that there's a chance of him playing. I think it's too risky if the game stays on Sunday to have him start practicing any later than today.
Interesting. Now, that's different than what's seemingly coming out of the Broncos, which feels like they're trying to plant the seed a little bit that there's a chance. But, of course, we know there's gamesmanship involved there. And it does seem unlikely, but I wouldn't rule it out quite as much. I think the Broncos would actually be comfortable with Drew Lock practicing for the first time on Friday and playing on Sunday.
Man, and then it's got to be a true game time decision, right? He practices Friday for the first time, see how he wakes up on Saturday and Sunday.
Yep, I think that's in the realm of possibility for sure. I mean, I think the Broncos believe that he's enough of an upgrade over what they have available to him that they would be willing to take, slightly unprepared Drew Lock over fully prepared Brett Rippon.
Sure. And I can see that certainly as well. And guys, in other quarterback news, Joe Flacco will be getting the start this week for the Jets. The Broncos missed him by 1 game.
Well, they caused this.
Yep.
Now, was that a throwing shoulder injury for Sam Darnold? Because when I saw it, I could have sworn it was his left shoulder that he got thrown down on.
I don't remember. I remember when he was I'm not sure, actually, with the AC joint.
Yeah, because it's a very similar injury to what Drew Lock is dealing with. But just based on the fact that he came right back into the game tells me it probably wasn't as severe. But, yeah, there you go. Joe Flacco starting for the Jets. If you weren't already fading the Jets, go ahead and fade them some more now. I mean, look, think of it this way, guys. The only time the Jets made plays on offense is when Sam Darnold created those plays by escaping the pocket.
Yeah.
How in the world is Joe Flacco going to make any plays back there?
Yeah, if Darnold had gone out and not returned because of that injury, and it is his throwing shoulder. It is his right shoulder, by the way.
Interesting.
If he had not returned, I think the Broncos would have won that game by 20 points.
I was definitely scared that Joe Flacco was going to beat them.
Yeah, I was at first, but in retrospect, seeing how they really cranked up the pressure, cranked up the blitz, and we all know what kind of mobility or lack thereof that Joe Flacco possesses, I think it would have been an ugly, ugly game for the Jets.
Before the game, we talked about how what if Joe comes in and leads them to victory? That may be the lowest point. That may be rock bottom for the Broncos. But then when I saw him, about to go in, and I just remembered how melancholy he is, and I'm like, oh, this guy's got no fire to come in and beat the Broncos now.
Couldn't even get some juice going against his former team.
Oh.
Although still perfect game out there for him.
2 for 2.
2 for 2 attempts. All right, fellas, we're going to move on into the podcast questions from our listeners. Of course, you can catch the second half of the podcast anywhere you listen to podcasts. We appreciate everyone who tunes into this and that. If you're on YouTube watching us, make sure you hit us with a like on this video. Subscribe to the YouTube channel if you would. And the same thing goes for the podcast side. Hit us with a 5-star review if you enjoy the show. We certainly enjoy having you listen. So that's going to wrap it up for us on the live side of things. We'll see you on the other side.